Hi guys and welcome to a Sisay emiel deck tech video. I'm gonna call this League of Legends Sisay. So this new unicorn legendary horsey is able to flicker creatures like Darkside Extortionist, gaining infinite mana to win the game with Sisay. And inside this deck tech video we are gonna go over how Sisay should be piloted and played, and also the different lines in achieving infinite mana, and how we're going to win the game once we reach the infinite mana stage. Sisay Weatherlight Captain is first and foremost a stacks adaptive meta deck. That means that the cards I'm gonna showcase in this video are actually quite irrelevant, because the answer is you have to adapt towards your own metagame. For example, Kunora's Hound of Ephros is currently good versus popular reanimator strategies and also Underworld Breach combos, and Thalia is very strong versus the very popular Ad Nauseam strategies people are going for. And you have this universal Narset Powder Veils that are most likely always going to be good. But in the future, if the metagame changes and becomes different, these cards has to change as well. And that is why Sisay is something of a different deck to actually build and pilot and construct, because you always have to know about the metagame and how you might have to change it. But Sisay will never become something of a spell slinger deck. It's always going to be a permanent stacks interactive deck, because with Ashiok you're going to interact with your opponents, denying the search and removing some graveyard, but also from white and black legendary, Sisay will grow and be able to eventually find bigger legendaries. But this is where we run into a little bit of a power level problem. You see, we don't have the legendary hate bears Sisay is currently looking for, because they haven't been printed yet. Therefore, you might have to include a bunch of other stacks cards like Draenei Magistrate that isn't a legendary, but the effect is amazing. The same thing, Deafening Silence and Sphere of Resistance are two good examples of stacks cards you sometimes play to fill out the gap because they are good versus your general metagame. I would like to show you something Sisay is looking for. Here's Grenzo the Dungeon Warden. I've been trying to play Grenzo a lot in Sisay, but it doesn't really work, because usually you have a bunch of artifacts and enchantments inside the deck. So his ability is basically putting random cards you don't want to have in your graveyard into your graveyard, and that's sad. I would be super happy if Astra Oddsmaker or Mayhem Devil would have been legendary. I'm gonna showcase that example why later in the video when we're talking about the combo lines. But another big reason why Sisay is a stacks deck besides these cards are fueling her power to find bigger legendary permanents is because Sisay is not the consistently fastest combo deck out there. There are other decks with Ad Nauseam, Food Chain and other similar things, fast as Oracle Consultation, that are consistently able to pull off wins turn 3 to turn 4, where Sisay is somewhat of a turn 4, turn 5 deck. Now sometimes you can actually win the game with Sisay turn 3.
There's a line here that Mons can win with. I think he's going to go grab an Amanatu.
Played responsibly, he drew a lot of cards off that fish.
Yeah.
This was from a cEDH Nexus tournament gameplay where I was extremely lucky and able to pull out a win turn 3 with Sisay. That usually doesn't happen. The reason was that Darkside Extortionist got really feeded and were able to generate 7 treasures. I also had a Lavinia Surus Renegade in hand, a great hate bear for only 2 mana, 2 colors, making Sisay into a 4/4, then able to find a Menatu, flickering Darkside, and then continuing finding the rest of the combo pieces and winning the game. But don't have the aim when you go into games with Sisay that you're gonna win turn 3. This is usually how games looks like. Turn 1, Dork. Turn 2, secondary land, cast a hate bear like Lavinia, Azorius Renegade, and then cast a secondary Dork. Turn 3, this is where you cast your commander Sisay, the Weatherlight Captain, and now you might be able to put a secondary land into play, tap this for a secondary 2 mana cost hate bear, pass the turn, and turn 4 put a land into play, and now you can start to activate and control the game with Sisay. This is how it usually looks like. But how does Sisay actually win the game? She has 4 one-card combos that are all demanding various different setups. You've seen one of them, Darkside Extortionist. Here we have Orochi Leafcaller, Bloom Tender, and Fabaro Elder. Yes, that is correct. These 2 cards are actually one-card combos for Sisay. Let's begin with the lines with Orochi Leafcaller. You cast this for only 1 green mana, then you activate Sisay and you find Gaia's Cradle. Tap this thing for a whole bunch of mana, depending on the amount of creatures you have. Now, with Orochi Leafcaller, you can tap 1 green mana to filter it into any colored mana. That means you can activate Sisay if you have 5 creatures in play. Find Darevi on the ETB, untap Gaia's Cradle. Now, tap this thing, activate Sisay again. From Darevi only, Sisay will become a 5/5. That is enough to find Emiel the Blessed. Now, you need 3 mana to flicker Darevi and untap this thing. You might get stuck in your thought, so simply go to combat, attack with Sisay against someone that doesn't have a blocker. And when you do, you're gonna get a trigger from Darevi to untap this thing, tap this thing, flicker Darevi, and from here you have infinite mana. Voila! The Darkside Extortionist lines are a little bit simple but demand something from your opponents. The big difference here is that for Sisay to be able to win the game from Orochi Leafcaller, she has to be a 4/4 to be able to find Darevi. However, in the case of Darkside, Sisay only needs to be a 3/3. So when you cast this and Sisay is a 3/3, you find Nimby, Esteemed Speaker. On the ETB effect, you will return Darkside back to your hand, recast it, gain a whole bunch of new artifacts. With this, Sisay is currently a 4/4. Find Amenatu, the Fate Shifter. On the minus ability, Flicker Darkside comes back with a whole new bunch of treasures. From this Amenatu only, Sisay is a 5/5. Find Emiel. Now you only need 3 more mana to make infinite mana with Darkside, and you have the win. That takes us to the Bloom Tender Fabaro Elder lines, and now you're gonna see why I wanna have Grenzo Dungeon Warden inside this deck and why I wish Mayhem Devil was a legendary. For example, if you have either one of these in play and Sisay in play, both of these are only going to tap for green and white, and that doesn't really get you that far. If you have Lavinia Sorcerer's Renegade inside play, they're gonna tap for Bunt colors, and with that you can activate and find Darevi. But this doesn't really get you that far either, because they only tap for Bunt colors still. However, if you cast, let's say, Grenzo Dungeon Warden, and with him, Sisay suddenly becomes a 4/4. That's perfect when you want to find Darevi. Then, when you can tap this thing for green, white, black and red, and you're probably gonna have a blue land hanging around somewhere to activate Sisay, finding Darevi, Imperial Tacticianer, with the color identity of blue, which means these guys will now tap for all 5 colors on the ETB effect, untap this thing, tap this thing, and find Emiel. And now you simply just need 3 more mana. You can go to combat and get an untap trigger from this thing to untap this thing, and from here you have infinite mana with these cards. I would like to showcase a different combo line that is a little bit slower but still quite functional. These 3 cards on their own are infinite mana, and all these 3 cards are legendaries, which means Sisay can find them on her own. Now, if you have enough creatures, you tap this for, let's say, 4 creatures, you're gonna get 4 mana, you consume 4 of those green mana to flicker this, gaining infinite green mana. And with the infinite green mana, you can start to untap your other lands like Underground Sea that will tap for blue and black, and you're probably gonna have something that taps for red and white as well. And from here you basically have infinite mana win the game with Sisay. And this is probably how you're gonna assemble this line. In your last opponent's end step, you find Darevi, Imperial Tacticianer. You tap down one of your opponent's blockers, you take your turn, you activate Sisay and you find, let's say, Gaia's Cradle, you go to combat with all of your hate bears, including this thing. If you have 5 creatures, let's say, you're going to untap 5 lands, and from here you can activate and find Emiel the Blessed, then tap this thing, flicker this thing, and you have the win. In other words, Sisay can win the game from only being a 4/4 if you have enough creatures to go to combat with, and depending on the board state of your opponents in general as well. But how are we actually going to win the game once we have infinite mana? The answer is quite simple. We are going to use cards that are already good inside the deck for other reasons. Teferi Time Reveler is a great card to find in your last opponent's end step with Sisay to make sure that you're able to combo off without getting disrupted by your opponents. Both Nayela is great at killing even mind sensors and reanimating, or well, moving cards from your graveyards like Derevi, if Derevi ends up in your graveyard, to the bottom of your library, rebuilding your plan A. Gaia Reach Sanitarium is great versus Faza's Oracle. Usually people play Cephalid Causoleum, but this is a legendary card, so this is what we're playing. Also, I would like to point out that this is how you're going to disrupt a Faza's Oracle. In response to Faza's Oracle, you activate Sisay, and if they don't do anything, you find Teferi Time Reveler. So the ETB effect is gonna be on the stack. When that happens, they aren't allowed to cast Tainted Pact or Demonic Consultation. In fact, they aren't allowed to do anything. And from there, the effect is going to resolve and they won't win the game. If they respond to your CC activation on this cast and they cast Tainted Pact, they're gonna exile their entire library, and then while this is still on the stack, your Sisay activation resolves, you find Gaia Reach Sanitarium, and while this is still on the stack, you activate this thing and you kill them. So that is how you interact with a Faza's Oracle with Sisay, with both of these cards inside your deck. But with some creativity, we can create Wincons from only these cards. So you find this and this and this. With this, your opponents won't be able to interact and do anything this turn. With Gaia Reach Sanitarium, you tap it, and then you force each player to draw and discard a card. You have infinite untaps with Darevi, so you can activate this infinitely. And with both Nayela, you won't deck yourself because you can refill your graveyard. So you're basically going to deck your opponents while they aren't able to do anything. But what if an opponent has a Eldrazi Titan inside their deck and you can't deck them, the Gitrog monster for example, or you've tutored for Narset Parter of Veils earlier in the game to interact with your opponents. Don't worry, we're still gonna kill them next turn. So you find this, you have this in play, you activate Gaia Reach Sanitarium a bunch until they have basically discarded their entire hand, because they aren't allowed to draw cards, they are still allowed to discard cards. Then with this you gain infinite life, and with this put a +1/+1 counter on target creature, so you make all your creatures infinite. Then you tap down all their permanents, and if you still have attackers, you can go to combat and you can kill them. You usually need to go to combat to assemble your Wincon sometimes with Derevi, so you usually don't have a combat step this turn. So you pause the turn, in their upkeep they're gonna untap before they draw, activate this, generate infinite mana, tap down all of their permanents, then force them to draw and discard a card. Because of this, they aren't allowed to draw a card later during their draw step. So you're basically forcing them to not draw a card and basically tap down everything. And because this is in play, they aren't even allowed to cast instants and sorceries. They are basically unable to play the game from this point. So they are all going to pass the turn to your turn, where everything is infinite, attack and win. But what if you don't want to play Gaia Reach Sanitarium because you don't think it's good versus your metagame? We were making a case about Mayhem Devil helping Bloom Tender. Now if you have Kinnan in your deck, you should have Kinnan inside the CC deck. Kinnan is an auto include in every CC deck in my opinion, by the way. With infinite mana, you can activate Kinnan infinitely until you find this Devil, which is not a human, and if you didn't have Darkside Extortionist in play already, you can also find this. So with Mayhem Devil, Darkside Extortionist, and emiel, you have infinite damage. But at this point, your creativity sets the limit, and if you wanna brew and talk to people about Sisay, in the description below of the video, there's a link to the Sisay Weatherlight Captain Discord server, where there are a lot of people brewing and figuring out ways to build and pilot the emiel Sisay deck. At that server, there are still people brewing with Giganta as a companion for Sisay. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed the video. If you like what I do and you wanna support me, feel free to share my videos or even checking out my Patreon page. Also, purchasing cards from the TCG Players website using the affiliate link in the description below of the video will also help the channel grow. So a big thank you to all of you.